Have you ever walked into your doctor's office feeling perfectly capable, only to leave feeling a little smaller than when you came in? Maybe you couldn't quite put your finger on why. Maybe it was something they said, or the way they said it. If you're a woman over 60, you might have noticed that sometimes your age walks into the room before you do. And sadly, some doctors treat that number like a diagnosis. Today, I want to have a heart-to-heart conversation with you, not as a stranger behind a screen, but as someone who's seen the system from the inside. I'm a doctor, and I've worked with hundreds of older women over the years. Women who were sharp, vibrant, funny, active, and yet so often were spoken to like they were fading into the background. That's not right. And it's not what you deserve. So here's what we're going to talk about. There are certain questions doctors ask, often in a gentle tone with a concerned look, that can sound caring at first, but are actually subtle red flags. They're questions that can slowly chip away at your independence, your confidence, and even your right to know what's happening with your own body. I'm going to share 5 of the most dangerous ones I've heard. And more importantly, I'll help you recognize what's really being said underneath. Because once you spot these traps, you can protect yourself and speak up with power. Let's start with one that I hear all too often. It goes something like this. Are you sure you want to know the results? Now, when a doctor asks this, it might seem like they're being kind. Maybe they're trying to protect you from worry, right? But let me be crystal clear. That question is a red flag. Because why on earth wouldn't you want to know the truth about your own body? And why would anyone, especially your doctor, try to keep it from you? I had a patient years ago named Linda. She was 68, full of energy, but lately she'd been feeling unusually tired. Nothing dramatic, just a slow fade in her energy. But she trusted her instincts, and she went to her doctor. They did some blood work. When she came back for the results, he smiled and said, "Everything looks okay. Honestly, do you even want to get into the full breakdown?" And Linda, being polite, said no. She figured he'd tell her if something was wrong. 6 months later, she came to me for a second opinion. We pulled up that exact same blood test. Her iron levels were dangerously low, and her platelets were falling. It was a sign of early bone marrow issues, something that needed attention. And the worst part? The signs were already there when her first doctor saw the results. He just didn't think she needed to know. Maybe he was in a rush. Maybe he didn't want to explain something complex. Or maybe, and this happens more than you'd think, he assumed she couldn't handle the information, that she wouldn't understand. But here's what I believe. If you're strong enough to live through heartbreak, raise a family, work, survive loss, rebuild yourself, then you're strong enough to hear the truth about your health. No one, not even a doctor, has the right to decide how much you can handle. If a doctor ever asks you if you want to hear your results, your answer should be clear. Yes, I absolutely do. Please walk me through everything. If they hesitate, push. You're not being difficult. You're being informed. And sometimes that single decision can change your entire outcome. Now there's another question I hear that really gets under my skin. It usually comes after a patient brings up a possible treatment or surgery. The doctor leans in, lowers their voice and says, "Do you really want to go through all that at your age?" Let me pause here. That phrase, "at your age," is one of the most loaded, limiting, and quietly cruel things you can hear in a medical office. And sadly, it's almost never said to younger patients, even when the treatments are far more intense. Why? Because age, in some minds, signals limitation, not potential. But let me tell you about Margaret. She was 72, smart as a whip, still walking her dog twice a day, doing her own gardening, volunteering at a local animal shelter. She had knee arthritis that was making daily life miserable. So her primary doctor referred her to an orthopedic surgeon. When she asked about surgery, the surgeon shrugged and said, "You could, but do you really want to go through all that at your age?" Those words planted doubt. Not medical doubt, emotional doubt. Doubt about whether she was worth the effort, whether her comfort mattered, whether 72 meant the end of new possibilities. And that doubt nearly cost her her mobility. When Margaret came to me, I was stunned. She was the perfect candidate for surgery. Her heart was healthy, her lifestyle was active, and most importantly, she wanted to move without pain. She wasn't asking for a miracle. She was asking to keep living fully. And guess what? She had the surgery, she healed beautifully, and now she's back to hiking. Yes, hiking, with a local senior group on weekends. So if a doctor ever questions whether something is worth it at your age, I want you to remember something. Your age is not a limitation. It's a story, and you're still writing it. You have every right to pursue treatment, healing, comfort, and strength. You deserve to feel good in your body. And any doctor who sees your age before they see your potential, well, maybe it's time they're not your doctor anymore. There's power in knowing your worth. And there's even more power in defending it, especially in places where it's quietly questioned. The more you speak up, the more others will too. And slowly, we shift the conversation. Not just about aging, but about respect. Let's keep going. There's another question that might sound spiritual, even poetic, when it's said out loud. It's delivered with a soft voice, a calm tone, maybe even a gentle hand on the shoulder. But behind the softness lies a dangerous assumption. The question is, have you considered just letting nature take its course? Now, don't get me wrong. There are moments in medicine, real moments, where comfort and quality of life take priority over aggressive treatment. And those conversations can be deeply meaningful. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about how this phrase gets misused. About how too many older women hear this not as an option, but as a conclusion. One that was reached for them without their voice in the room. Let me tell you about Dorothy. She was 82 and still lived independently. She volunteered twice a week at the local library, played bridge on Fridays, and had a house full of plants she cared for like children. One morning, she felt a lump. She went in, got a scan, and was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. That kind of diagnosis can rattle anyone, but Dorothy was calm. She wanted to understand her options. But before she could even ask, her doctor sighed and said, "At your age, maybe it's time to let nature take its course." He didn't mention surgery. He didn't refer her to an oncologist. He didn't talk about survival rates, recovery times, or what kind of future she might still have. Instead, he wrote her off, not because of her condition, but because of her date of birth. When she came to me, she still had questions, real ones. She didn't want to suffer. She didn't want a long recovery. But she also didn't want to feel like her life no longer counted. We sat down, we talked through every possibility, and she chose a simple lumpectomy with a short recovery. That was 5 years ago. And yes, Dorothy's still around, still volunteering, still playing bridge, still watering those plants. And it makes you wonder, how many women never get that chance simply because someone decided for them that it wasn't worth it? Here's what I want you to remember. Choosing not to treat something is a valid choice. But it must be your choice. It must come after you've been given every fact, every option, every honest possibility. It should never be suggested as a shortcut, a way to avoid explaining, or a soft way to push you out the door. So if a doctor ever says, "Let nature take its course," take a breath, then ask, "Are you saying there are no treatment options? Or are you assuming I'm too old to hear them?" You'll be amazed at what that simple question can reveal. Sometimes it's not about your body at all. It's about someone else's bias. And speaking of bias, let's talk about a question that sounds neutral on the surface, but can carry a heavy hidden message underneath. It usually goes like this. Who's making your medical decisions for you? You might hear this if you walk in with your spouse, your daughter, your grandson, or even just mention that a loved one helps drive you to appointments. At first, it sounds like a practical question, and sometimes it is, but other times, and this is when you have to be careful, it's not about gathering information. It's about quietly questioning your independence. I'll never forget Helen. She was 76, sharp as a tack, still handling her own bills, cooking 3 meals a day, and managing her prescriptions better than most 20-somethings. One winter day, during an icy spell, her daughter drove her to a routine checkup. During the visit, the doctor asked about one of her medications, and Helen paused for just a second, trying to remember the dosage. That's all it took. The doctor turned to the daughter and said, "So, do you usually help her make her medical decisions?" In that moment, Helen became invisible. From then on, the doctor spoke mostly to the daughter, as if Helen wasn't in the room. Her words were cut short. Her questions brushed aside. And before they even left the office, her medical chart had a note. Patient accompanied by daughter. Some difficulty recalling medication. Recommend family involvement. Just like that, a seed was planted. One that could grow into future assumptions, restrictions, even legal action if it ever came to that. And all of it started with one pause, one judgment, one question. Now let's be real. There are times when family does need to step in, when cognitive issues are real and support is essential, but that moment should come with honesty, transparency, and real evaluation. Not a snap judgment because of a gray hair, a forgotten number, or a ride from a loved one. So if anyone, even a well-meaning doctor, asks, "Who's making your medical decisions?" Don't shrink. Don't laugh it off. Sit up straight and say, "I do. But I appreciate support from my family when I need it." And then look them in the eye. Because your presence in that room matters. Your voice matters. Oh. And no one should speak about your health as if you're not there to hear it. Now I know these stories can be tough to hear. Maybe one of them reminded you of something that happened to you. Maybe there was a time when a doctor talked around you instead of to you. Maybe you walked out of an appointment feeling like you were being quietly dismissed, and you couldn't quite explain why. But here's the thing. Once you recognize these subtle patterns, you don't fall for them again. You start asking questions. You start insisting on answers. And you become the kind of patient that doctors can't brush off. Because the truth is, no matter your age, you are still the most important person in the exam room. Not your caregiver, not your medical chart. You. Let's keep going. There's one more question I want to talk about today. It may seem harmless, maybe even friendly, but when it's asked out of context, it carries a deeper message that can impact your freedom in ways you might not expect. The question is, are you still driving? Now, driving is personal. For many of us, it's more than just a way to get around. It represents independence, freedom, choice, that feeling of being in control of your own life. And yes, there are times when a doctor absolutely needs to ask about driving, when there are signs of memory issues, physical limitations, or risks to safety. But what I've seen too often is this question being asked at the wrong time, for the wrong reasons, and used in the wrong way. Imagine you go in for a routine checkup. You're there to talk about your blood pressure or your arthritis. Maybe you have a rash on your arm. Then, out of nowhere, your doctor asks, "Are you still driving?" There's no mention of cognitive concern, no problem raised by you, just a casual question that seems to hang in the air. And suddenly, it's not just a question, it's a test. You see, when that question isn't tied to a specific concern, it's often being used as a quiet screen, a way to gauge whether you're still functioning without actually saying the words. And the answer you give? That can end up in your chart. A simple, "Yes, I still drive," might get twisted into patient appears unaware of limitations. And if you say no, maybe because you just don't like driving at night anymore, it could be logged as loss of independence, monitor for further decline. And here's the part that truly worries me. Once that kind of note goes into your record, it can follow you. It can influence how other doctors view you. It can affect your insurance. In some states, it could even trigger reports to licensing agencies. And all of it began not with a diagnosis, but with a judgment. Let me tell you about a patient I once knew. Her name was Grace. She was 80 years old, sharp as ever, still active in her church, and volunteering at a food pantry every week. She chose not to drive anymore simply because her neighborhood had excellent public transportation and she liked walking. At a checkup, her doctor asked if she was still driving. She said no. He raised an eyebrow and wrote a note. Patient no longer drives. Observe for signs of cognitive or physical decline. That one sentence led to a follow-up appointment with a neurologist, a cognitive screening she didn't ask for, and a call to her insurance company. She had to fight to explain herself, to prove she hadn't lost anything. All because she made a perfectly reasonable choice, a choice any adult should be allowed to make without consequences. So, if you ever hear that question, especially if it seems unrelated to the reason you're there, I want you to pause. And I want you to take a deep breath. Then say calmly and clearly, yes, I do drive. Or no, I don't, but that's my choice. Why do you ask? Force the conversation into the open. Make them explain. Because your independence, your decisions, your life, they matter. And no one should chip away at them with vague assumptions. Now, I know this might be a lot to take in. You might be thinking back to appointments where you brushed off a strange comment or let something slide because it didn't seem important. But let me tell you something. Every time you speak up, every time you ask for clarity, every time you assert your place at the center of your own care, you're not just standing up for yourself. You're standing up for every woman over 60 who has ever been told, silently or directly, that she's too old to matter. Because you do matter. You matter in every way. Your thoughts, your choices, your body, your future, all of it matters. And you deserve doctors who respect that, who speak to you, not around you, who give you the full truth, even when it's hard, who see your age not as an ending, but as a mark of strength. If you've ever left a doctor's office feeling ignored, minimized, or quietly dismissed, I want you to know this. You are not alone. This happens more often than it should. But that doesn't mean it has to keep happening. You have every right to say, I want the full results. You have every right to say, yes, I want treatment. You have every right to say, don't make assumptions about my age. You have every right to be heard. And if a doctor can't give you that, then you have every right to find one who will. So now, I want to hear from you. Has a doctor ever asked you something that made you feel uneasy? Something that sounded kind on the surface but left you doubting yourself inside? Share your story in the comments. Because when we talk about these moments, we help others recognize them too. We create a space where women over 60 are no longer brushed aside. We bring each other forward. And if this video resonated with you, please take a moment to like it and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. Every week we share content made just for you to help you stay strong, live boldly, and protect what matters most, your health, your voice, and your peace of mind. Because your life doesn't shrink after 60. It expands in wisdom, in courage, in clarity. And we're here to walk that path with you. Here's to living your best life at any age. And never letting anyone make you feel invisible again.